There is also a letter which I think I quote to a nephew of his on a reading program on how to educate yourself. He says, you must study all the religious texts, and if you find that you think there is no God, be willing to accept this and let it make you happy. And if you find that there is, I wish the same for you. Which means that he thought it himself. Must have, in order to be able to write that. He must have come at some point who allowed himself to think the heavens are empty. Well, this is empirical on my part, but it's very, very rare for people who've decided that it's untrue to go back. Extremely rare for atheists to reconvert, or to convert, or to become believers again. Once you've gone there, you can't, there's really no going back over that bridge. So, that he was not a Christian is beyond doubt. That he was absolutely against any state sponsorship of any religion of any kind is certain, and that he died without any hope of outliving his body, I think is reasonably sure, yeah.
I have a question from the Edmund Burke Scholar in the back.
Quick question then, why the Jefferson Bible?
Well, I'm asked in that case, why the Jefferson Bible? Well, oddly enough, it's proposed to him by John Adams, who says, why don't you tackle this question of the New Testament? And so Jefferson takes the view that, as does Thomas Paine, that Jesus Christ, the Nazarene, assuming he ever existed, was at least an exemplary human being, whose precepts were, as far as they can be understood, admirable ones. He can't say, I don't think anything that's inconsistent with that. Well, you can be an atheist and believe that. In fact, I know a number of Muslim atheists whose initial way out from the poison of Islam was to notice what a horrible figure Muhammad is, even as adumbrated in the Quran and in the teachings. Constantly interested in getting married to younger and younger girls, the latest one being 9. Always laying down the law on how much spoil and plunder you could take. Very acquisitive, very greedy, very ambitious. Unattractive. Many Muslims think, well, why is this guy the messenger of God? Some of them get out by means of Christianity. They say, well, this Nazarene fellow, who's also mentioned in the Quran, doesn't seem to have wanted anything for himself. Doesn't appear to have been greedy, or acquisitive, or a sexsmith. Now, all of this is totally meaningless to me, I should say. I don't believe a word of any of these texts. But if you're looking for a handhold, and you're not quite ready to let go of faith, but you're willing to let go of dogma, that's one way it can be done. And so the belief that Jesus of Nazareth was not necessarily all that bad a guy, it was consistent with believing that he wasn't the Son of God, which of course he was not, because there is no God to have a son, and you know all that. And virgins don't conceive or give birth, and any more than statues weep or bleed. And that was basically Jefferson's position.
The Edmund Burke Scholar has a follow-up. Go ahead, John, fast, quick.
But even that, by the way, even that he wouldn't allow to be published in his own lifetime. Which gives you an idea of how political he was. He was extremely political, very calculating. So this is what I think, but I'm sure not going to let everyone know that's what I think. So if he wouldn't even go that far in public, imagine how far he went in private.
John, what is your follow-up? Fast.
Just a follow-up. I mean, the question is about how he added it. I mean, you described it as he removed the stuff that, was offensive to reason. So is what remains sort of available to reason that the reason can assent to? Is he set up as, sort of spirituality that doesn't require revelation? Sort of a Kantian view that he set up?
The questioner thinks that he has me in a pincer. and to some extent he does. I mean, he would if I was Thomas Jefferson, because Jefferson is indeed trying to have it both ways. He's saying, look, there is ethics in this, there is morality, but it's also overlaid by superstition and myth, and so forth. One wants to kind of cleanse it from that, which is what Protestants have always tried to do with Christianity. Jefferson, in fact, said that he believed Unitarianism would become the main faith or the main allegiance in the United States. He was wrong there. But something like Unitarian belief, I think, is now very, very widespread, as is Reformed Judaism. A sort of non-religious ethical spirituality is very, very widespread, far too much so for my own taste, but I don't think this circle can be squared, if that's your question to me, because much of the advice given in the Bible is flat out immoral or amoral. Just to take only the New Testament, you aren't allowed to take a judgment, make form of judgment on anybody, condemn them unless cast the first stone, in other words, unless you are yourself without sin. Well, that's ridiculous. On that basis, you couldn't indict Charles Manson. You'd have to be a sinless, virtuous person yourself. It's obviously not true. It's obviously an immoral thing to say. So is the idea of taking no thought for the morrow, no saving, no thrift, don't worry about your family, don't do any savings, don't think in any continent manner. There's no need for that. Now, that is obviously advice that, if taken, would be lethal, and as offered, is immoral. But it only makes sense if you think, as the speaker evidently did, that human life wasn't going to go on for very much longer. That he and or his father would return very soon, so there wasn't any point in looking after your children or planting next year's crops or thinking about the future or building or anything of this sort. This is what's now called, in our mad Christian culture, pre-millenarian dispensationalism. There's no point in caring about the forests or the oceans or the atmosphere because it isn't going to matter for very long. I regard that as an obviously self-evidently evil doctrine, on all fours with jihadism. It doesn't deserve to be protected by the definition of it being a Christian thought. That only makes it worse.
Oh,
we're making a rod for our own backs. Anyway, Jefferson, as I said, born in the pre-Darwinian Dark Ages, wasn't quite able to reach out and grasp that nettle.
There's another chap over here to your right with his hand up.
I'm curious, what's your take on the state of the press in the United States? And also, do you have any thoughts, and I'm curious if you read any blogs and what your thoughts are on them, some call them the hope for citizen journalism and all that. Curious what your take is on that.
The gentleman asked what I think of my profession, journalism, at the present, and
Thank you, my good man.
And whether I think that the blogging, the rise of the blogger, is that of the citizen journalist. Was that a fair summary? Well, I became a journalist because I didn't want to have to rely on the press for information. And I'm very sorry for people who do think that that's what they're getting when they buy the New York Times in the morning. I only read it to make sure that what everyone else thinks is going on. Because it's useful to know what people think is the news. And none of my sources are from the press. And I don't watch the television at all. And yes, from bloggers and their allies, I get most of what I think I need to know. And I'm very happy at the possibility, well, the evident likelihood now, of the decline of the networks and of the flagship newspapers, which seem to me to be just engines of reassurance and consensus and bad writing, poor English. Let them all die, I don't give a damn.
I don't understand the United Nations. I don't understand what goes on with them, how much power they have or don't have, how necessary they are or not. What role do they play?
The lady is flummoxed by the role and nature of the United Nations. Wants to know how they do this, what role do they play, what goes on there. Look, you're not alone. I mean, who here has seen Hotel Rwanda, for example? Good. But if you haven't seen it, you ought to go. It's actually, it gives you about 10% of what happened in Rwanda, but it's a pretty solid 10%.